Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Norwich Talk for the first live stream in quite some time. And my goodness, what a time to get back on the live stream bandwagon. Stuart Webber has confirmed today that he will be leaving Norwich City Football Club. His notice was handed in early March, according to a statement from himself and one from Delia and Michael. He's currently serving a 12-month notice period, which, and let's get this one out in the open straight away, could be cut short, according to Connor Southwell of the Pinkin, if he finds another club where Norwich City are then entitled to be compensated, or if Norwich City find his replacement. My goodness, it is colossal news coming out of Norwich City today. It's news that has felt like it's been coming for a while, yet it's finally here and it feels kind of strange. My opinion off the bat is I'm a little bit uncertain looking into the future, but for the most part, what we'll be doing today is reflecting on Stuart Webber's tenure as sporting director of our football club. I've got a massive list in front of me labeled the good and the bad, with a little one below it saying what next. Well, there's a few question marks, as well as a few actual points to be made. Apologies, we were scheduled for a 1:30 start. I did have some issues with my Ethernet cable, which, if you are a long-term viewer, you know how important the Ethernet cable is to the quality of these streams. So I had to make sure I get that right, so we didn't have any messing about, we'll call it, like we've had in the past before it came around. First and foremost, how are you all? I thought I'd do a live one today because as of late, the videos have been pre-recorded. They've been transfer rumours, Stuart Webber's interview, of course, which we discussed. And I'll be honest, I've missed the interaction of it all. Replying to you in the comments of the videos, which have gone down really well. And I've really appreciated all the comments and all the thoughts. I've just missed the live element of being able to essentially have a conversation. So here we are doing it once more. My goodness, it really is massive news coming out of Norwich City. So what do we know? Stuart Webber oversaw 6 seasons at Norwich City as our sporting director. Within those 6 seasons, there were 2 title wins, 2 relegations, and 2 mid-table championship finishes. So things came in twos for Stuart Webber. Delia and Michael, in their statement that was released, described themselves as devastated. That's the word they used about him leaving. It was revealed that, and the club put this out as at the turn of the year. It was then confirmed to be March, which, a quarter of the way through the year. Is it really the turn of the year? We don't know, but we're not going to get too bogged down in the technicality of it. Stuart Webber went to their house, said, "Look, I'm done." We don't know how the conversation went, but it left them devastated. What he's done at Norwich City has been, I think in the long run, it's been very good for this football club. There's been ups, there's been downs. We're at the end of the tenure where typically there has been probably a few more downs than ups as of late. He's serving a 12-month notice period, which I mentioned earlier. That started in March, which in theory could see him stay at Norwich until next March. However, the stipulations of that, which, as I said earlier, comes from Connor's article, really good article on the Pinkin. If Norwich City were to find a suitable replacement, or if Stuart Webber finds another club, then that period can be cut short. Now, in terms of finding the replacement, this was, and I'm sure it wasn't to those inside the club, obviously, but to me as a fan, I'm sure to you as fans as well, has come out of nowhere that he's leaving, especially after his interview that he gave with various media outlets, local media outlets. It's been, the theme there was kind of, look, the season that has just gone wasn't that bad. There's loads of exciting things going on behind the scenes. I kind of got the vibe from it that he was going to stay. So mentally, I've been preparing for another season of this club being run by Stuart Webber, which again, in theory, could happen. But that seems quite unlikely. So in terms of that interview, where it leaves me, I don't know, because he didn't exclusively say, right, I'm going to be here next season. I'm committed to Norwich City. But It does. I don't think it looks particularly great, but it's all about inference. It's all about how you read between the lines. The latest thing, which was mentioned, I'm not sure how long ago now, but was that he has been linked with Leeds United. You know, he's made it no secret at all that he grew up a Leeds United supporter. He was a season ticket holder before sort of getting into his career. So it makes a lot of sense. Leeds have just been taken over by I think it's the 49ers consortium, which is a group of Americans who own the San Francisco 49ers. More Americans coming into English football. Again, Norwich City part of that process. So today, I think it was the Football Insider said Leeds have stepped up their interest. So with the aforementioned stipulation that he could be off if he gets a new club sooner rather than later, the link to Leeds United fan through and through, quite clearly, has probably had enough of Norwich City. It seems like that will be the reason behind the timing, as well as the fact that, again, he said he's supporting the transition from him to the next person. So as far as notice goes, credit to him. He's done it the right way. He's not just, walked out and left us in the lurch. But it seems to add up that he will be off to Leeds. Now, before we move on, let's have a look at some comments. Adam says, turn up for the books. Never thought he'd be out, but it's likely being his decision. Yeah, the board have said they were devastated. Well, sorry, Delia and Michael have said they were devastated. I think the opinion within the club of Webber, for the most part, from people that are there, was that that he was the leader essentially. It was his football club to do whatever he wants to do at. We won't speculate too much on where he'll be going, because wherever he does go, I don't think he'll have as much autonomy as he has had at Norwich City. So that'll be interesting for him to adapt to essentially having a boss again, which will be very, very interesting. Yeah, we've mentioned that point, haven't we? Was in terms of the interview. I'm not sure it was it's kind of the Mandela effect, really. I need to sit back and watch that interview again, those interviews again, I should say, but I don't particularly want to watch all of them again. But yeah, it did feel, the vibe that I got was that he wasn't going to go anywhere. But again, in theory, I'm going to have to keep saying this just to balance the books. He could be here for another season at the very least. The credit where credit's due, whatever you think of him, the notice period, etc., and the transition hopefully will be a smooth one. He's done the right thing there. Good afternoon, Zuka. It's a very hot day today, as you can see. Actually, you can't see how blue the sky is. Paulie's gone for it there. Webber's had enough of Norwich. Norwich have had enough of Webber. I think the general consensus was that time is up. It's interesting. That one, baby. You've again also gone for it. All these fans saying it's a loss. Start having standards and stop celebrating mediocrity. Yeah, do you know what? I think it's a fair point given where we are. If you'd made this point after one of the promotions, again, the argument would be completely different. But as we said, I guess technically 4 out of the 6 seasons were failures. You could argue the first mid-table finish wasn't particularly a failure, but 2 relegations is certainly a failure. One more debatable than the other in terms of the status of it. Yeah, it's we'll break it down in a minute. I'm just having a little catch up with the comments. A really interesting question from Drake Foss. With the sweeping changes seemingly coming, does Mark Atanasio try to buy the remaining shares and kickstart the club? I believe not. I can imagine, and this is a question I will ask now, is where does it leave the American investment? I don't think it changes too much, because for me, the infrastructure within the club will remain pretty much the same. The recruitment will stay the same. The plans to bolster Colney rather than completely sort of evolutionize, is that the right word? I can't imagine too much changes other than the man nodding, well, not nodding, but like signing off plans and generating those plans. I don't think too much changes. In Connor's article, it did mention in terms of recruitment that the recruitment plan is there, it's solid, it's been, in his words, signed off. They've got their targets, as Connor says, they're going after them. For me, that was kind of the assurance that I wanted immediately. How does this affect the short-term future? The fact that he is looking to make this a smooth transition, and Norwich City are going to externally, again, let's get that one out there, are going to externally appoint. Those questions have been answered and again, to my satisfaction. Whatever you think of the current recruitment system, that's up for debate. But everything's been left in place to basically pick up and carry on and maybe slightly modify. That was one of the main things that Stuart Webber always said. His tenure here has probably been twice as long as he perhaps would have thought, but the plan was to pick up Norwich, change things for the better, which I think he has done for the most part. Put it down in a position where it's it's okay. It's not like he's leaving under really awful conditions. But yeah, the Norfolk Bike Barn mentions that he wants Neil Adams to have a crack, or they want Neil Adams to have a crack at the job. I agree. He comes across as a proper football man. It seems like a lovely guy, definitely a club legend, but technical director is the newly formed role that he will be taking on, which I think is maybe a little bit more I don't know, in terms of, I think it encompasses more corporate than sporting director, which is sporting, as it says on the tin. The snake pit will love it, says Ed. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Some of the comments, and this is a point we'll raise in terms of perhaps what's not great. Yeah, a good captain making that point as well. Comments like that from him will be part of the bad side of him, is what we'll call it. Anyway, let's dive into our list. Let's start with the good. The first thing I want to say about Stuart Webber was that he was always transparent. And for me, that is, it's a positive thing. His line that he loved to wheel out, which I think is a fair enough line, is people in his position don't talk, which from what you can gather is fairly true. His candor, his transparency was never, well, it never fell short, did it? There was that sort of media silence essentially, but again, that period of silence was fairly normal for someone of his role. I don't feel like he ever hid things away. Personality, I can't put it in good or bad. It's how you take it. For me, I think he was a bit clumsy with some of the things that he said, especially the comments on women's football. For me, they didn't go well. They didn't go down well with me at all. I think it was very careless in terms of the way he phrased things. It was then put out there that he does support it more than perhaps he leads on. But the comments from himself were very odd. But the first point, and I've got it as a good one, was that he was always, or is always, very transparent. This statement, this statement of intent, essentially, is proving that point. Again, external recruitment process. Let's just, I don't know if I'll have to keep mentioning that, but if anyone asks in the comments, perhaps you can do my job for me and just let that person know. It has been reported that he has actually spoken to Leeds, so it's not just speculation that he could be going to Leeds. He has actually held conversations. I think Nick Mashter was the person who broke that story. It just makes a lot of sense, and I mean, good luck to him. Leeds are in a decent position where they hadn't liked their owner for quite some time. The owner has now changed, as we mentioned earlier. It will provide, I mean, especially with the change of ownership, you have no idea what budgets and stuff are going to be like, but immediately you would think a club of Leeds stature, which, yes, pains me to say, will have a much bigger budget and, essentially a much sort of firmer grip on Stuart Webber's heart. So that all makes sense. Good captain with a good point here. Don't mistake transparency with the need to bolster and show off his ego. Yeah, I think, again, that falls down to the how you receive it. Transparency for me is the objective word, where we can't question the transparency of him, but how you take it is up to you. There have been times where comments haven't gone down well. It's been very David Brent-like, essentially, with comments that have been made, but also I never really particularly felt left in the lurch. Let's talk a little bit about maybe the bad comments, if you will, which is, I think, the main one for me that sticks out to me will be the sacking of Dean Smith. And one of the things that he said was basically they wanted to stick with Dean Smith. This was just after Norwich City lost to Luton at the end of a very poor spell halfway through a very poor season, as we now know, he said that the fans essentially wanted it, so he gave the fans what they wanted, which maybe in his brain thought would appease some people. But it certainly didn't. It just felt like we had been blamed. And again, this idea that they wanted to stick with him, but the fans didn't, is a bit like, well, pick a lane and stick to it. Don't sit on the fence, which is very much what that was. Promotions under different circumstances. What he achieved at Norwich City in terms of those promotion seasons was phenomenal. He was at the very top whilst giving us some fantastic memories. Whilst as a person, maybe he's not for you, what he's achieved at this football club at the best of times, we'll say, not as in the bigger picture, but at the best of times has been phenomenal. 2 unbelievable seasons for very different reasons. The first one, a complete surprise, where Norwich City essentially revolutionised the way of, they played football and they set the championship alight. And, it was courtesy of signings that he was in charge of, essentially. Obviously he's got his scouting network, which deserve all the credit that they get for making those signings, at which half, if not all, are basically not here anymore. Kieran Scott, the former chief scout, is now sporting director at Middlesbrough, once thought of as Stuart Webber's successor. I think Stuart Webber clearly stayed, and Scott thought, right, now is my chance to jump ship. So he went to Middlesbrough, where he's seemingly doing a pretty good job. But that first season was immense. The signings of Timu Pukki, Tim Krul, Emi Buendia, Kenny McLean coming in, being signed the previous season, Jordan Rhodes scoring vital goals, all really, really important signings for Norwich City after, and again, this is an important point here, after that first season of essentially laying the foundation, making some lots and lots of signings, some good, some bad, but players such as Mario Vrancic, Christoph Zimmermann, Onel Hernandez, Marco Stiepermann, all who played vital roles in that season. That's an incredible achievement, and it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a fluke at all. The second promotion, for me, I hold very dearly in the sense of Norwich City dealt with expectations slowly but very, very well in the end. And whilst it was gutting to not be there, I would love to have been able to see that in the flesh. Norwich City just dominating the championship in a different way to what they did. Not too different stylistically, but in a very different way in terms of the expectation. I would love to have been there, but during a very essentially depressing time. You could look forward to watching Norwich City play. And again, he was a big part of that. Signings in terms of that season, there wasn't too many, and if you look back on it, maybe not all of them were brilliant. Another thing, again, bringing Daniel Farke into the club, the first thing he did was he came in, cleared the deadwood, and took a massive punt on Daniel Farke. For me, again, one of the best decisions in this club's history to bring in Daniel Farke. The connection he had with the fans was immense. We've talked about him endlessly, and I'm sure he'll come up again in the future until, well, we're no longer here. Daniel Farke is that much of a legend at Norwich City in terms of what he achieved, and bringing him in was a massive punt because he came from the fourth tier of German football. He came in with obviously no experience of English football, no experience of football above the fourth tier. Did a smashing job, in my opinion. Anyway, so that's another good thing. Club philosophy is another massive thing. He phrased it weirdly, but I don't think there was a good way to phrase it in terms of the point he made in his interviews, which was Norwich City have now set much higher standards than they previously held. Of course, we always expect Norwich to be fighting for the Premier League, but it goes from sort of hoping really to expectations. I know I just didn't expect, but I want to change that to hope. It always went from hoping Norwich City would be competing for the Premier League to now the mentality is we expect to be there. I mean, we also expect to get relegated, which is a point to perhaps put in the bad column. But there's been a massive shift in culture around Norwich City, and a big part of that has been expectation. A big part of that has been the development on the training centre, which, again, as fans, we can't particularly enjoy because we don't go there like the players do. But it's worth noting the infrastructure. I think what the plan they have in place at the moment is very good in the sense of things are becoming more data driven, which is proving to be effective in football. You've got the American investment. I'm sure Stuart Webber had quite an important part of that because of the work that he'd done before to make Norwich City an attractive prospect to those American investors, the Atanasios, the general infrastructure, however you want to call that, and now this new recruitment system, this South American link. Norwich are one of the first clubs to have scouts dedicated to South America. That network is I strongly believe will bear a lot of dividends to Norwich City in the near future, but as well as the distant future. Players like Gabby Sara have come from it. Marcelino Nunez, who has recently been linked with a £20 million move to Brighton. Bizarre, but it's there. And that's just after, not really having much experience in that market. So it'll be really interesting to see how that develops. Again, Stuart Webber, the head of these projects. And the final point on good that I'll have before perhaps maybe I counter some of the bad points is the fees received for players such as James Maddison, Ben Godfrey, Jacob and Josh Murphy, Jamal Lewis, Emi Buendia. Now, whilst only one of these, Emi Buendia, are players that he brought into the club to essentially, and Norwich City, those players have always said, then, never felt like Norwich were getting in the way. Perhaps maybe Wendy will tell you a different story. But the fact that those deals were negotiated so smartly where Norwich City really reaped the benefits. You look at these players now. Jacob Murphy's had a hell of a comeback in his career playing for Newcastle, but Josh Murphy, what did he do after his £12 million move, which might sound like peanuts to some clubs, but as Norwich fans, we're smart enough to recognise that. To us, that's quite a big fee. Ben Godfrey was all right in the Premier League, went for 25 million plus, and is now, from what I'm reading, being put on the transfer market. Jamal Lewis, however, you also do have players who have kicked on really well, such as James Maddison, who is just a top talent. Absolutely love watching him, and Buendia, who slowly got going. Is now proving to be a really reliable talent under a fantastic manager, not some ex-legend, Liverpool legend. Says, given our history, not just the last 15 years, we should expect to be top flight. I think that's a fair comment. We should expect it. We should expect to be top flight. I assume we shouldn't be hoping for mid-table. It just shows he doesn't care about history as much as well. To be fair, I think from his position, you're right. Oh no, you're not right. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I was completely wrong there. For him, his position, recent history has been something he's overseen. That's all been in his control. So you're going to look at that and then compare it to the past where, I don't know what, say, look at this 6 years of Stuart Webber here, the 6 years prior. Well, it was very up and down. It was very up and down is what I'll say, under different circumstances where Norwich City got themselves essentially in those 6 years, taking chances, etc. Norwich City got themselves into a position where Stuart Webber had to come in and rip everything to shreds and start again, essentially. So that's how I kind of view that. The expectations thing, I think it's a fair point if you perhaps aren't happy where Norwich are. I don't think he really is, but his job, again, is to put it into perspective, is to say, look, things aren't the worst. We were close to a top 6 finish, which is right, but the debate will be forever ongoing, won't it? Right, let's move on to the bad. Again, the personality. Inability to connect with fans properly, and his candor was unnecessary sometimes. The Premier League season, the most recent Premier League season, for me was perhaps his biggest failure. And I'm sure this is something he probably wouldn't say it publicly, I don't think, but this is something that I think he will have a big say in. It is the narrative that the club pushed, the expectations that they pushed to the fans. The goal was to be top 26, and then it was to be top 18, top 17 in England. With the whole narrative, especially from Daniel Farke, the spokesman, essentially was that Norwich that you want to stay in the Premier League, that they should stay in the Premier League, and that they believe they would. And he spent over £60 million essentially on players who, for the most part, I don't think any of them remain or will remain, bar maybe Christos Scholas, and there's a whole, well, there isn't actually a whole debate to be had on Christos Scholas, but you get my point. There is a real question of can he hack it at the highest level, which, again, for example, if he was to go to Leeds, where the expectations will be to get promoted, they will have had to have done their research. They will have to know whether they believe he can do it at the top level. And to be fair, he'll probably be able to combat that quite easily in terms of budget given him resources and general stature and the way things were going, and how at Norwich the attention wasn't always on getting promoted. It was on infrastructure, training ground, all that nonsense. So I can't imagine that'll be too hard to deflect. In terms of can he do it at the top level, from our perspective, no, it seems that way. The reaction has been very, very interesting in terms of, you've got Leeds fans asking if he's any good, you've got Norwich fans saying no, he's not, and then I'd say you've got, I don't even know what percent to put on it, but I'd say a minority of Norwich fans, from what I see on Twitter, that's the important disclaimer, that the grass perhaps won't be greener. I think a lot of people, myself included, were worried that Neil Adams would take over, and you'd be left wondering, well, is this man qualified for this job beyond being Webber's assistant, but technical director? Is his role Norwich City will externally appoint? In terms of when there's rumours about that, we'll talk about that. I'm hoping to perhaps get some guests on so we can begin that speculation process, because beyond signings, that's something that is monumental for the football club, how they appoint the person to follow Stuart Webber. We had the BK8 scandal under Stuart Webber, didn't we? That was a bad point, a very, very bad point, which the reason I mentioned that is because comments that were made, I think it was after relegation, where it was something along the lines of he very clearly wasn't happy that deal was cancelled, which I think, again, don't quote me on this, and you'd have to go back and watch it, but I'm very confident in saying implications were made that it affected the transfer budget, and he wasn't best pleased about that. I've got that one down as just shut up and move on. Do you know what I mean? Shut up and get on with it. The next thing in terms of the bad would be hiring Dean Smith, following the praise that we've given him for hiring Daniel Farker, a decision that wasn't very smart at all from the club. After the first week of it, the first couple of weeks of it really was hiring Dean Smith. Dean Smith was, and I don't think anyone can ever really disprove this, was a really poor head coach for Norwich City. There was that initial bounce at the beginning, but the bounce was soon sort of zapped from the squad, basically just immediately, which is very interesting. Again, the comments we mentioned around sacking him just wasn't great. It was such a weird thing. On paper, it was an experienced Premier League manager, but looking back on it, I think myself included I was a bit naive to how that was achieved. It's always about what spin you put on things. Looking back on it and having seen how poorly he's done at Norwich and how he just did literally nothing at Leicester, really not sure why that happened. A really bizarre appointment, which got the outcome it deserved. How you put a spin on these things. For example, Dean Smith with Aston Villa, this he spent loads of money to keep up. You keep them up, you can say, right, well, he can't do it with that money, but you can also put a more positive spin on it and say, well, he basically had to rebuild the squad after contracts and loans expired. So for me, yeah, Dean Smith goes down as a negative in terms of the appointment, which is, out of the 3 appointments for Norwich City, 1 has been poor, 1 was good, very, very good, and 1, the current manager, David Wagner, we don't really know. It's leaning towards not great at the moment, but we will give him a fair shot. David Wagner, by the way, you have to feel sorry for him in the sense of he's done it again. Stuart Webber has essentially brought him to a club, kind of got him in a position to kick on, and will be leaving again. I can imagine quite obviously, well, I can't even imagine it. It very clearly was completely Stuart Webber's idea to bring David Wagner in, his mate, his former colleague, and now he's leaving again. So for me, the implication, bar some miracle at the beginning of the season, is that David Wagner won't be here very long. He's on a contract that basically doesn't commit him to the club for very long. So it'll be interesting to see, if a new sporting director comes in, if they want to bring in their own coach, and if they do that, you then think, well, hang on a minute, has the recruitment been set up to essentially revolve around David Wagner and his proposed style? What's the plan going forward in terms of, the argument was always with Stuart Webber in charge, it could be Daniel Farker, it could be X, it could be Y, it could be Z, and the style of football and the intention behind the football would always remain the same. Now Stuart Webber has been taken, or will be taken out of the equation. The new sporting director will come in, and you can imagine, for it to be the right appointment, the ethos, etc., will be similar. But will that person want to bring in a new coach, change the style, change the recruitment? We don't know these things, but we do know that Norwich will be meticulously planning that, which is very odd. And to be honest with you, the last point on the bad side of it all will be essentially how it's ended. It's a massive shame. Pardon me, sorry. It's a shame how it's gone because of what he's achieved. The chance of we want Webber out, the comments made about divorcees in the snake pit. It's all very in character, and in terms of a footballing disaster, I wouldn't necessarily call it one of those. It's not going to go down as a massive scandal, but it's a shame for a man who has gotten us promoted twice in fantastic style, and has overseen 2 Premier League seasons. It's a shame that it has to end with essentially most of the fans being relieved that he's leaving, and not liking him personally. It's just a massive shame, but yeah, that's all you can really say about that. You had the whole mountain climbing stuff. I think that's more for the memes than a genuine argument. I don't really think that affected much, to be honest with you. But yeah, they're my thoughts. Let's have a look at some comments. We've got a Leeds fan, Russ. Hi Ben, Leeds fan here. Webber linked with you. What are my thoughts? What are my thoughts on Daniel Farker? Oh, I did not see Daniel Farker had been linked. I wonder how strong that link is and where that's from. But essentially, if you want my thoughts, if you want my in-depth thoughts, watch the whole video back. But at Leeds, there's a real, there's 2 sides to Stuart Webber. There's this egotistical side to Stuart Webber where it gets a bit like, come on. And then there's the side of Stuart Webber where, with the right team around him, he can oversee some really strong transfers and achieve good things. And I think, you look at Norwich over the past few years, if they'd have had a much bigger budget, would things have gone differently? From what that one Premier League season where they actually spent a bit of money, how that went, you'd suggest that perhaps you can't hack it at the highest level. But in terms of revolutionising a club for better or worse, which I think for the record is for better at Norwich City, his track record at Norwich and Huddersfield prove that he can make a massive difference, and that he is quite a smart bloke. Slightly different role, but how about David McNally coming back? No. Was says, remember as well, Farker was not the first choice. Smith was the original target back then, so Farker period was almost a fluke. No, not having that. Farker period was not almost a fluke. But yeah, the question now changes to what now? Right on cue, Paul. Where does this leave? So I believe it's Zoe Webber. I thought it was Zoe Ward, but in Connor's article it says Zoe Webber, so perhaps they were married recently or something. But Norwich City Executive Director, Zoe Webber. She stays at the club. Nothing at the moment will have changed. There were comments made in his interviews about how that relationship, how their marriage is perceived by fans, which is when it's, for the worse, for better or for worse. That's a great little meme there, great little pun. But when you're looking at the negative side of things, I think he made a fair point in saying Norwich fans go, oh, well, his wife's at the club, he's not going to go anywhere when things are going well. Oh, thank God his wife's at the club, he won't leave. I'm not sure anyone was ever saying that after he said that, to be honest with you. But in terms of her role, I should very much imagine he's not going anywhere. So yeah, she isn't going anywhere. I think it's very much a case of you have Norwich's structure. We'll use fingers. You have Norwich City structure. It's then take Webber out, put the new Webber in, I don't know why I use my fingers. That's really weird. Rob, good to hear, Rob. Hope you're well. Happy he's going. Felt that has all felt haphazard yet since the first couple of seasons he was here. With cheap European options no longer available, no planned post-Bundia, and a bunch of aging freebies now. Time's up. I think that's a fair comment in the sense of no cheap European options. I think that's the fair comment. I'll leave that up actually for now. The no plan post-Bundia, I think there was a plan. I just don't think it was a very good plan. I think with these things, there is usually a plan. It just wasn't a good one. The recruitment, and he said it essentially. Mistakes were made, and the speculation before was, well, if you're going to make those mistakes, you've got to go. He's going. So I think you're absolutely right. Time's up. The aging freebies now, I'm not sure is a criticism, because he said, and I'm fine with it, to be honest with you, this idea of Norwich City perhaps shifting the style to suit a bit more. I can't think of a PG way to say naughty word housery. Rough and tumble. Should we call it rough and tumble football? There is a shift, and the aging freebies you describe are a big part of one, changing the culture at the club, where with someone like Shane Duffy, you've got bags of experience at a very high level. With someone like Ashley Barnes, you've got bags of experience, but also a key part of a championship winning team. Jack Stacey, a player with, again, promotions under his belt, a decent age and a point to prove. I think to call them aging freebies is a bit harsh. Maybe he's done with football for a while and finally get to climb the mountains he's been training for. Very good. I don't think he'll be done with football. It was very interesting because the comments made, the thing he always used to say was along the lines of, I could have a career outside of football. And it always, to me, felt like he was trying to say once he leaves Norwich, he'll turn away from football. But with the speculation at the moment, especially with courtesy of Russ, the Leeds fan, Daniel Farke being linked with Leeds and Stuart Webber himself, it seems a bit like, right, well, that's not going to happen. Daniel Farke, by the way, for you, Russ, would be a fantastic coach. Don't judge it after a season is the important thing. A lot of fans were sort of saying that after Mönchengladbach parted ways with him. Second season, Daniel Farke ball is elite. You know that yourself as a Leeds fan, not from the Carrow Road game, but from the game away from home where we beat Leeds 3-0. I think that summed up Norwich beautifully. Wonderful on the ball, tenacious off it. Tenacious is not the right word to use there, but I'll stick with it. I think he'll be a very good coach. I'd love to see him with a different budget. Do you know what? If him and Webber went to Leeds, I'll be very intrigued as to how that would go, because budget would probably be, I don't know how much bigger because of the new ownership. I don't know what the budgets will be, but with it being a lot bigger, it's kind of like, well, can they do what they did at Norwich, but a lot better with a bit more money? Who knows? That would be very interesting. If Daniel Farke was to go to Leeds, rather than disliking Daniel Farke, I think I'd just have to hate Leeds a bit less. I don't actually hate Leeds. They just rattle me because I'm a Norwich fan. Can I just say what will happen to the club? Do you know who the next full directing is to be? No, essentially not. No, there are no names at the moment. Again, as I said, as soon as there's speculation out there, you obviously know we will pounce on it immediately. Again, if you have any questions, by the way, do stick them in the chat, because I am probably going to wrap up now, because at this point I am just repeating myself. But we don't know these things. What we do know, or not what we do know, what I think will happen in terms of where Norwich City go, the South American thing, I think that will be a big part of recruitment. The age, signing older players thing for free, being smart with your money and bringing in experience. Again, that's a direction I think Norwich City will continue to take. I think it's a good thing. The training ground will continue to be developed. Again, that will be a big part of enticing players into Norwich City. I mean, commercially, I'm sure everything will stay the same with the club. I think it's just going to be a different boss, essentially, to oversee everything and perhaps suggest a few different ideas, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's massive. I think, again, on the pitch and our perspective, from our perspective, is that where does it leave David Wagner? For me, it makes sense to stick with Wagner at the moment, because if I'm a sporting director coming into Norwich, you perhaps assume that the recruitment has been based around him. And to be fair, Wagner's he had an all right career. The past few years really haven't been great for him at all. But for him as a football coach and a football manager, he's got a great chance to perhaps prove a lot of people wrong, most of Carrow Road for that matter. But I think it makes sense to stick with him. Any news that I find out or come upon, whatever, we shall discuss. Whether that's live, I'm hoping to do more live stuff again, essentially, especially now the internet isn't a problem. I would like to say thank you all very much for watching. If you're not watching this live, your thoughts, I'd love to know them in the comments down below. Content to come, transfers, I guess, transfers. I'm expecting it to pick up again pretty soon because, we had that period where Norwich were signing free players when they became available. Again, so far, fairly decent. But for now, Stuart Webber, wonder where he will go. Thanks very much for watching. Leave a little thumbs up if you please. Subscribe too if you fancy it. And I'll see you again very, very soon.